Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime Shares with Kevin, where we add value to people's lives, happening every day at 12 on ebizradio.com. Joining for the Lunchtime Careers segment today, we have the HR manager at HR Studio, Jody Eiser. Jody, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, and you, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for making the time, and I'm really glad to have this conversation with you. Jody, don't you want to start off with telling us more about who you are, what it is you do, and more about HR Studio?
Okay, great. So my background has been very varied, if I could say. I have a master's in psychology, and I've also studied NLP. I've a full gambit, but also my main responsibilities have been in HR. So I've been in HR for over 10 years, and started with a company called HR Studio about maybe 8 months ago. And it has been phenomenal, the work that we've done during a time where it's been COVID-19 and everyone else has been complaining about business. But I think what really brings us, we were founded in 2015. We are a bespoke consultancy firm, mainly to your small, medium-sized businesses. And they are usually looking for quality HR services, but cannot afford that of large corporates and cannot afford to employ someone full-time. So that's when we come in and where we bring an HR solution that's both tailored to the size of the company as well as their budgets. We offer specialist human resources, recruitment across various industries, both in person and remotely. So we either attend meetings in person today, mostly over Zoom or Hangouts. And we also assist with occupational health and safety, industrial relations, and one of our newest things is also around wellness.
Fantastic. And I mean, that leads us straight into today's conversation, right? So don't you want to give us some insight of what it is we're talking about? I know that when I read the information and I was looking at the importance of what you were mentioning here, like there's some quite specific points that are really starting to show its head, I think, in corporate today and in business today. And I think this conversation is a biggie.
Absolutely. Over the last year, I would say the conversations have become quite different in business today, more around your job security because of many of your small to medium size having to close their doors or retrench half of their workforce. The mental wellness, that is a huge one. If you look at SADC around mental wellness and depression, you know, those numbers, and anxiety as well, those numbers are really scary in terms of how many people have found that they have been far worse with the COVID situation. And we also, and that is really impacting the productivity from working remotely rather than being in an office, and, you know, not having people around you has been another factor that we come across quite a bit. So what we have found is, you know, business owners are trying to make sure productivity is the same, that their level of expectations are the same, but really we needing to take time to go back and say, what is it that the employees need? And sometimes it's just a space of communication. And I found communication, there's no such thing as over communicating, especially in the environment we're in today. And, you know, most workers are so used to putting their heads down, getting on with it, and they don't actually communicate to bosses. Bosses think my staff are doing nothing unless they see in the final result. So that's become a different conversation as well. So very much around leadership. But also leaders are having to have a lot more impact being empathetic. And the skill of leadership, it has really shifted in this last year. So empathy, definitely a must. And what we are giving the employees is giving them a space. So we all in uncharted territories at the moment, and HR Studio works with our trusted partners and our clients to really help navigate them around some of these hard questions and issues, which are allowing the business owners to then focus on the work at hand and being able to have the difficult conversations in the workplace.
Yeah, I think, you know, you raised an important point here that empathy is, you know, something that leaders something that leaders really should be, focusing on, because I think we are in a unique situation. We are in a position that really has pushed a few buttons that make us think twice, right? Yes. But in terms of from an HR manager's perspective, have you also noticed that as much as being coaches and working with executives, that as much as we've being in that position, we've emphasized the importance of empathy all these years, and only till now it's really starting to sink in that people are actually leaders and business owners really need to understand and formulate what empathy looks like for other people.
Yes, I've been a coach for many years previous to joining HR Studio as well. And I'm actually a Tony Robbins coach by qualification. And what I have found is that, we did, as you mentioned, speak about empathy and changing the game and, situational leadership and things for leaders in the past. But not all leaders were able to adopt or adapt to it so easily. And it is becoming more and more of a conversation these days. And I think our leaders and managers out there are now realizing that there is this need. Not only are their employees being affected, but they are being affected by people that they may have lost due to COVID and still having to function. Who talked about the second pandemic, and in South Africa we're talking about this third wave already that's coming, and I think that's very scary and something that managers are having to scale up in order to manage and lead their people. And virtual working has become more challenging. There's some that take advantage, and how do you start to manage people who are at home, bearing in mind you need to focus on empathy, but people have children at home that they've been homeschooling, and you're still expecting them to work a full day and produce as they were before. So it's a juggling act that managers are now having to manage.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, that sort of leads me to the next question, is like, for us to be able to really build the awareness around this, we also need to have the right HR policies in place right now, right? So how important is it to get the HR policies in place that need to be there? How important is this?
It's absolutely imperative. Without them, how do you act fairly to everyone in the organization? So there has, at least we've seen quite a rise in disciplinary problems, and that's because people have either taken extended periods of leave, they don't respond to clients or to their bosses or their colleagues. And I think, that is why it is so important. Without the policies, we can't protect the company and the employees' rights at the same time. And that's what the policies are really there for, to protect both. We want to make sure we're being fair when we're disciplining people, and we want to make sure that they know the expectations. So job specs, KPIs are really, really important. The policies then come, and those really just solidify everything we are trying to get through to individuals as the business owners of what is expected, what is tolerated, what isn't. And really, it's an absolute must for businesses to have this in place. You don't want to go to the CCMA.
Yeah, you want to avoid that as much as possible, right?
Exactly.
But I mean, in terms of what can employers do, so we know we need to do better. It's becoming a theme in the world and in our work environment. But what can employers do better to support employees, but also protect the interests of their business?
So I would say the first thing would be to be in touch with a company like ourselves. Because we're so bespoke, we will look at your business, we'll see where the gaps are, what is missing, what relevant policies are in place. And this just helps us to align with what the expectations of management are. And at the same time, we also engage with the employees to make sure that they understand what is expected of them. So we don't just go in and implement, we actually also work with both the managers and the employees to make sure there's an understanding of the policies, what their job expectations are, how they can be measured, why we can do things like performance improvement plans. So there should never be a surprise, really, when it comes to a performance improvement plan. Employees really need to have an understanding of what is expected. And we also do have the industrial relations side to our business to step in when there are problems. So if we needing to do a letter of warning, etc. But there has to be a code of conduct in place with the relevant policies before we even get into those types of discussions. And that's where we would consult to a business on where they needing to implement, where the gaps are, etc.
And I'm just like thinking around everything you're saying now. So what are some of those things that you're starting to notice, from an HR management perspective? What are some of those things that are sort of peeking their heads out and obvious to sort of similar experiences? Because I'm sure that, like you mentioned, people are starting to stay at home, or people are, they're not optimally functioning, their mental health. What are some of those other things that are people you're noticing in this environment?
So around mental health, that's a big thing that we've noticed, and we are implementing a wellness program ourselves for some of our clients, where we have a qualified social worker who is engaging at the moment on a one-on-one basis, but we also offer group sessions and either face-to-face or on Zoom, as it is right now. Other things we've been involved in is looking from a labor law perspective. Vaccines have become the next hot topic, and should we be vaccinated, shouldn't we, and how do we impose that as a business? But because it's so new, there aren't laws that we can really go to from previous cases to say, okay, you have to be vaccinated. Some people have compromised systems. Other people don't believe in vaccinations as a whole. So, how do you start to manage that? And we are having those types of conversations with businesses at the moment. And one of the biggest things is businesses, the smaller businesses especially, have been coming to us saying, we need to do performance reviews because we notice things are slipping. And our first question is, well, do your employees know what they need to do? Very different when they remote work into when it's in an office. And as a manager, you can oversee what they're doing. When things are going wrong, they can just shout across the room and say, by the way, I need some advice. Now it's a very different thing. So having regular check-ins with your staff, actually creating that space for that communication is really, really important, as well as the support. So, as I mentioned earlier, families have lost other family members. And when they're going through this grieving process, it's very hard for them to then focus on a job, and especially if they are still remote working. The lockdown has gradually improved, and we've been at lockdown 1, but with a third wave, we don't know what's going to happen next. So who should be sitting in the office? What type of rosters do you have in place so that you can make sure there's enough social distancing? PPE, look at making sure that the relevant equipment is provided. And I think one of the harder conversations have become around what type of support is there for someone remote working. So if they don't have Wi-Fi at home, are you providing them with anything? Does the company have any budget for that? Because of the small, medium enterprises, it's not like a corporate, where a larger corporate at least, where you can just say, here's a dongle, or here's a laptop, and here's this and here's that. It's very different at this time. So that's another thing we're having to look at for businesses, of where are your budgets, and then also making sure that values, the mission statements are also all communicated to the employees. Without that, how are you creating that culture of work and performance in your space, regardless of whether you're in the office or not? So those are other kind of conversations. How do you have team building when you remote working? That's another one, because you don't necessarily touch base as a team all the time. So making sure those appointments are in the book. What type of things can you do together, either in an office if people are willing to come through, or in an open space, or how do we then do it remotely? And those are some of the different programs we've also been working with our current partners.
So, listening to it, I think it's almost like setting up a bit of a game plan, right? To really sort of go, not so that you intrinsically move into panic mode, but rather to set up a game plan for, okay, so if this is going to happen again, if there is going to be a third wave, if we are having to get back into lockdown, what is the plan, right?
Yes, exactly. And Yes, so that game plan is really so important, and that's where I love to come in, and so does the rest of the organization, in looking at where are the gaps. What does a client life cycle look like today? Because it's so different. It's not just the expected of the past and the norms of the past. We're having to change in a very dynamic and very fast changing environment. No one's been prepared for something like this before. So how do we still engage? How do we still motivate our staff? And one of the bigger questions that have come up is EQ, where we talk about empathy. Not every leader has that, and it's not necessarily something you can teach. So how do we make sure we instill in certain activities and support programs when we have a manager who may not be in sync with where their team is at, because the management style is having to change so quickly as well now?
Yeah, and the one thing that I'm laughing because I'm going, what is the case? And I don't think a lot of people know, but like, what is from a human rights perspective? Like, yes. I'm allowed to go, yeah, I want to get the COVID vaccine, but I'm also allowed to refuse it, right? Yes. How do you guys handle that? Because essentially, from when businesses go, yeah, this is important. We need to protect ourselves. We need to protect each other. But what if some of the staff kind of go, well, I don't want to do it. I don't want the vaccine.
Well, that's it. It's so difficult because, as I said, there's no prescribed law that's ever been there in the past. We've never really engaged in something like this. If you want to talk about Ebola and all those things, so many years ago, we don't have laws in place currently for, if we have a pandemic, this is what you do, and these are the vaccines. It would be great. But so everything is new and fresh. So the best we can advise is going by what law is prescribing at the moment. And that is, there isn't anything specifically that they are or aren't saying. If people are being vaccinated, that's great. But then some people are questioning, should your business pay for your vaccinations if you expected to be vaccinated to be in the office? And then we have people who, they are ill or on certain medications and have autoimmune diseases. So should they be coming to an office where people aren't vaccinated or vaccinated? That's the other question. And Can they be vaccinated? There's been a lot of talk with comorbidities and being vaccinated, which is another piece that's been interesting. And there's no clear answer on that at the moment either. And when will we be vaccinated? So if you look at South Africa in particular, I know the numbers may have changed, but from the last ones I was privy to last week, Thursday, was of the 1.5 million or so health workers, only around 300,000 have so far been vaccinated. So when are business people going to be vaccinated, the employees, when can we expect that? It might only be next year at the rate we're going. So how do you enforce certain things? So I think the first thing I would say is making sure you have the correct things in place, the plastic dividers that are between the desks, that you can socially distance. So maybe using a roster currently where you only have a certain amount of staff members in at a time. And things like, obviously, temperature control, although that's not the only thing. Some people have COVID, don't have temperatures, but it is a measure that has been used. Making sure you have the correct sanitizers and having that as people are walking in or out of your building. I would recommend that they have it on their desks as well. Wearing the masks. Those are all imperatives. And when the vaccinations are available, I think we're going to get into different types of discussions and more difficult discussions yet again.
Yeah.
Vaccinations, because we don't have the law, it will be up to people if they're going to be vaccinated. But then we need to look at those that aren't being vaccinated and look at the bigger picture of the business. So who is going to be impacted by it? And if they're relatively few, maybe and if their job is able to be done remotely, maybe that's where we need to have a different concern. But again, you need to make sure you put in the right processes and policies in place to account for that.
But as you're talking, Jody, what's occurring to me is, and it's not even part of our discussion today, but I think that also, and I think that's also part of the harder conversations we're going to be starting to have in the future, is how do I start really honing in the skill of employing the right kinds of people? If I know that I have to trust people, they have to be remote. there's a certain set of skills that's, a person needs. There's a certain set of strengths, like the first thing that comes to mind is being able to trust someone. People who are disciplined, people who are structured, people who manage their time well.
Yes.
All of that then, is an added conversation at who we're employing.
Absolutely. So just from a recruitment side, we've tried to do it a bit differently now, where we're bringing in assessments for our employees. So not as easy, and you obviously can't hire just based on an assessment. That would be seen as discriminatory if someone doesn't pass in a particular way. But I think it's very important to look at a different holistic approach when it comes to just recruiting people into your business. I've used many things in the past, especially DISC. DISC for me tells a lot, and it also helps to tell a lot about a team. So that has been one of the tools we've been using. And we also have a psychometrist that we outsource to specifically for some of the higher level positions, depending on the clients and what they're also willing to pay for as a recruitment package in its totality. Do they want to make sure they find in the best? So if we're going to do the psychometrics as part of the process, I think interviewing, so not just a manager interviewing, but some of the colleagues today, because you get a better sense. I think referrals have worked the best in the past, like from your good people. Those are the ones you want to tap into their networks, because generally I have found that those are the hires that stay and are usually successful. And so there's a lot that we're looking at also to add value in the recruitment side of things. And as I say, psychometrics is not going to give you all the answers, DISC is not, but it will give you a general understanding as to where a person's sitting at from a disciplined perspective. Are they analytical, depending on the roles that you are trying to fill. Amazing.
Jody from HR Studio, the HR manager, Jody Eiser. Thank you for joining me. And if we want to find out more about you guys, what we get hold of, like, do you have a website and a LinkedIn for us?
Absolutely. So we on the website, it's www.hrstudio.co.za, and we also are on LinkedIn. We do have a lot of blogs that we are posting at the moment, so things around vaccines, the art of having the harder conversations, and there's many more to come as well. So just to keep a look out there.
Fantastic, guys. And as Jody's mentioned, these links that she's talking about on the blog will be shared in the description box below, as well as the website and the LinkedIn. Jody, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for making some time for our Lunchtime Career segment.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Kevin. Great chatting to you.
Chat to you soon. Cheers. Bye.
Bye.